The earliest motorcycle dates all the way back to 1867, where two machines share the credit as being the first motorcycle ever made. 1867? What, Civil War and your mom being so old she could have been on the design team for one of these bikes had she not been too busy modeling for feet pics for Alexander Graham Bell. The Roper Steam Cycle and the Michaud-Perrault Steam Velocipede were both considered to be the earliest self-propelled motorcycles when they hit the scene in 1867. Since their inception, it's been hotly debated whether a machine powered by steam constitutes a motorcycle or not, but I say we give it to them. I mean, none of us were around then anyway, so why do we have the right to judge their accomplishments? These guys paved the way for future squids everywhere. The Roper Steam Cycle was so exciting, its inventor, Sylvester H. Roper, died of an alleged heart attack while riding it. Now that's some dedication. But that's also back in the day when if you went above 26 miles per hour, they thought that the wind speed would rip you off the motorcycle and you would just instantly die. Shortly after, the true first motorcycle powered by an internal combustion engine came to be. The Daimler Reitwagen, made by Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach, debuted in 1885. The machine was crude in every respect, once being described as looking more akin to a medieval torture device than a historic precursor to the modern motorcycle. It used a wooden frame and had what were essentially training wheels on either side. The extra set of wheels would lead to debates on whether or not the Reitwagen could be considered a motorcycle as well, being that if it couldn't stay upright while moving under its own power, it barely constitutes even being considered a bicycle, let alone a motorcycle, but I digress. The most significant piece of this machine is the engine, which would bear influence on almost all future motorcycles. The Daimler used a 246cc air-cooled single-cylinder 4-stroke combustion engine. This power plant had a float-metered carburetor and used mushroom intake valves, which are opened by the suction of the piston's intake stroke. In place of a modern electric ignition system like you'd see on a modern combustion engine, it used hot tube ignition that was composed of a platinum tube running into the combustion chamber that was heated by an external open flame. Yeah, guys, if you've never seen a really old school motorcycle up close and in person, the amount of open flames and oil spewing out of them is crazy. As this engine was being developed, it was not initially intended to be used in a motorcycle, but at the time, it wasn't capable of producing enough power to move anything larger. The Reitwagen had a belt drive and was controlled via a two-way twist grip that engaged the brakes when twist one way and applied power to the belt drive when twisted the other way. When said and done, this engine was able to produce 0.5 horsepower at 600 RPM. So it was pretty much neck and neck with the modern day Royal Enfield. No one's heart exploded on the initial test drive, although the Daimler seat did catch fire, prompting a few minor tweaks. By the following year, the Reitwagen had served its purpose for testing the new engine design, and Daimler would make further improvements for larger four-wheeled vehicles. But the Reitwagen was such an important milestone in the automotive world. Replicas have been showcased in dozens of museums around the world, including the AMA Motorcycle Hall of Fame, the Mercedes-Benz Museum, Honda Collection Hall, and even inside KTM's Motor Hall Museum in Austria. In the early 1900s, two American companies would enter the motorcycle game, they of course being Harley-Davidson and Indian. The first HD motorcycle engine was a single-cylinder 4-stroke engine. It was a relatively simple design, producing around 3 horsepower, which was pretty respectable at the time. This engine was used in the very first HD motorcycle, which was built in 1903. The engine had a displacement of 405 cc's and featured atmospheric intake valves and a mechanically operated exhaust valve. The prototype motorcycle using this engine was raced in the Milwaukee Motorcycle Race at the State Fair in 1904, where the boys from HD would take 4th place. In 1907 at the Chicago Automobile Show, Harley-Davidson would unveil an engine prototype that would become a ubiquitous characteristic of the brand, the 45-degree V-twin. This 880cc engine was able to produce more than double the power of the original single-cylinder, offering 7 horsepower and a top speed of 60 miles per hour. Their engine design was improved over the years, opting for mechanically operated intake valves, and the smaller 811cc was able to produce more power than the larger prototype. By 1913, a majority of motorcycles sold by Harley-Davidson would use the V-twin engine design and would continue using it until today. Not that same design, that would be crazy, but if we want to make some jokes, it's probably pretty similar. The first motorcycle from Indian were bicycles that used a single-cylinder engine in addition to traditional bike pedals to make power, kind of like an old-school moped. The first prototype was built in 1901 and used an engine that was able to produce 1.75 horsepower. You know things are getting serious when you're taking your horsepower out to the 100th place. These early prototypes were groundbreaking for the time. Indian co-founder Oscar Hedstrom even set the world motorcycle speed record for 56 miles per hour aboard one. The single-cylinder engines inside these bikes were produced a separate company called Aurora until 1907. A few years prior, Indian began developing their first V-twin engine. The design was fine-tuned over the following decade, and by 1916, Indian had built a side-valve 1000cc V-twin that was quieter and more powerful than any they had built before. This 42-degree twin was capable of reaching a top speed of 60 miles per hour, so we're still talking Grom territory for back in the day. One of the most famous motorcyclists of the time, Irwin Cannonball Baker, what an American name, was preferential to Indian and used one of their bikes to complete the coast-to-coast motorcycle world record, riding from San Diego to New York in 11 days and 12 hours in 1914. So for all you guys saying out there that you can't tour on XYZ bike, Sir Cannonball here rode across the country on what is essentially a bicycle with a crude V-twin engine on probably a bunch of dirt roads, so you've got no room to make excuses. This guy basically did the Trans-American Trail on old school setups. So you're all a bunch of babies. Following World War I, Indian released what would become their flagship model, the Scout and the Chief. The Scout was sold in two displacements, 610 and 740cc, while the Chief was ultimately sold in a 1200cc configuration. Can you imagine what that would have been like for back in the day, a 1200cc bike, when you're talking about like a 1 horsepower, 400cc single cylinder? It must have been mind-blowing. Both the Scout and the Chief featured innovative designs that would ultimately rival bikes produced by Harley-Davidson. Meanwhile, across the pond in Bavaria, BMW was having their first foray into motorcycle manufacturing. Forced to diversify following the conclusion of World War I, BMW chose to adopt the manufacturing of small engines and personal transportation instead of military aircraft. The first motorcycle to wear the BMW badge was the R32. The R32 used an air-cooled boxer twin engine with each opposing cylinders extending horizontally out of the frame. This boxer twin engine design would become a staple trademark of BMW Motorrad. The 494cc twin was capable of producing 8.5 horsepower, which was pretty stout for the time. The engine and transmission were a single unit, and the new boxer twin used a recirculating wet sump oil system, which was an advancement compared to the total loss oiling systems that were common at the time. The R32 also used a shaft final drive, which would become an iconic fixture of BMW's future motorcycles that can still be found on their bikes today. In the early 1930s, Triumph was having their own moments of innovation. The parallel twin engine found in the original Speed Twin, first sold in 1938, was a major turning point for the manufacturer and would set a new standard for British roadsters at the time. The 498cc overhead valve engine was capable of producing 27 horsepower, which was a lot for the time. While production halted during World War II, Triumph brought back the Speed Twin in 1947. This motorcycle would be credited for Triumph's successful post-war resurrection and would remain in production until 1966. Any experienced motorcyclist will tell you that maintaining proper tire inflation is key for both safety and performance. Our tires are the only thing keeping our bikes in contact with the ground, and accurate tire pressure directly correlates to traction and handling. With that in mind, it is an absolute no-brainer for every motorcyclist to have a Fanttik tire inflator. The Fanttik inflator can inflate a motorcycle tire in less than 30 seconds, and its small form factor makes it super easy to keep stashed away on a bike for easy access. This inflator has an intelligent mode that automatically switches the unit off when a determined PSI is met, which prevents you from having to continuously monitor or start and stop while you check with a gauge. The Fanttik tire inflator has a large capacity battery that allows for 23 minutes of continuous runtime. Other tire inflators can only work continuously for 10 minutes before they overheat and force you to take a break. So that means you can inflate both your motorcycle tires and all 4 of your car tires with ease and plenty of battery to spare. The Fanttik is a great addition to a motorcycle tail bag, especially when taking longer trips, because the tubeless wheel conversion on my desert sled may or may not leak or lose a PSI or 2 every couple of days. And with Fanttik, I don't have to worry about lugging around a clunky inflator or making unnecessary gas station stops. If you're like me and understand the importance of tire health, you should grab a Fanttik for yourself. Whether you ride a motorcycle or drive a car, the size, performance, and convenience of this unit is really unmatched. To grab a unit for yourself, click on the links in the description, select the Amazon coupon, and then use the code YAMMYX9 at checkout to get 20% off total for the Father's Day sale. Again, that's code YAMMYX9 for 20% off. Thanks so much to Fanttik for the support on today's video. In the decade following the Second World War, what we now know as the Big Four, meaning Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki, would begin enacting their plan for motorcycle world domination. Each company had been in business for many decades prior, working in other manufacturing and industrial areas, but in the years following the war, inexpensive personal transportation was in demand and the Big Four were ready to answer the call of the free market. While each manufacturer had their own successes with small displacement engines, they really shifted the industry paradigm with the popularization of the inline 4-cylinder engine. The inline 4, which had been used in certain racing motorcycles, had never been built for mass-produced motorcycles in the way that Honda, followed by the rest of the big four, would by the late 60s. Honda would pioneer the overhead cam transverse inline 4 motorcycle engine in the CB750. The CB750 was coined the original superbike, and the inline 4 engine would become the benchmark for motorcycle performance for essentially the next 50 years. The CB750, which made 68 horsepower, was considered to be a masterpiece. It was smooth with little vibration, it had easily serviced valves, and was capable of a top speed of 124 miles per hour. The CB750, which was a direct stab at the large displacement motorcycles that were popular in America, was capable of producing horsepower identical to the 1300cc contemporary from Harley-Davidson, despite having an engine that was nearly half its size. This engine, in combination with industry-leading tech, unmatched reliability, and incredibly value and affordability, made the CB750 a force to be reckoned with. The rest of the big four would follow suit with their own iterations on the universal Japanese motorcycle through the remainder of the 1970s. Two-stroke engines became relatively popular in motorcycles in the 70s as well. Two-stroke engines were favored for their simplicity, lightweight, and high power-to-weight ratio, making them popular choices for racing and performance-oriented motorcycles during this era. Differing from a four-stroke engine, a two-stroke engine completes the intake, compression, power, and exhaust strokes of the piston in just two strokes, with one upstroke and one downstroke. As a result, two-stroke engines tend to produce more power per cycle than four-stroke engines of similar size due to their more frequent power pulses. Two-stroke engines are simpler in designs and have fewer moving parts compared to four-stroke engines, making them lighter and easier to maintain. Some popular two-stroke engines at the time were Yamaha's RD350, which used a 347cc air-cooled parallel twin that was able to boost 39 horsepower. Then, of course, there was the Kawasaki H2 Mach 4, a 750cc two-stroke triple that would be dubbed the Widowmaker. And Suzuki would have a two-stroke three-cylinder of their own, the GT750, which would actually be the first mass-produced liquid-cooled Japanese motorcycle. The GT750, which was first released in 1971, was an early precursor to the liquid-cooled engine, as liquid cooling would not become commonplace on motorcycle until the 1980s. Liquid cooling was a huge game-changer for motorcycle performance, as the ability to more effectively regulate engine temperature allows room for greater power output without the risk of overheating. Liquid cooling was very important in the early advent of what we now know as the sport bike. The motorcycle that most considered to be the first to introduce this style was the Kawasaki GPZ 900R Ninja in 1984. That Ninja used a 904cc liquid-cooled inline-4 engine that was able to produce 115 horsepower, 30 more than the air-cooled Z1 that came before it. The 16-valve engine was able to reach a top speed of over 150 miles per hour, first production motorcycle to do so. In the early 1980s, BMW also needed to bring some new engine technology to the table in order to stay competitive, as their air-cooled boxer twins were starting to be significantly outdated compared to the Japanese competition. The K100, also known as the Flying Brick, was BMW's first foray into four-cylinder engines. Their longitudinal four-cylinder had dual overhead cams, liquid cooling, and fuel injection technology they were able to borrow from their cars. Fuel injection leads to increased power and broader and smoother power band, as an ECU takes real-time readings of air-to-fuel mixture and adds or removes fuel accordingly. Fuel injection would quickly be adopted by the competition for their high-performance machines. So as you can see, engines are refining over time. We're adding liquid cooling, fuel injection, all sort of things to control the parameters, to make sure the temperature doesn't get out of control, and to make sure that the finely tuned mixture of air-to-fuel ratios are perfect. By the early 2000s, motorcycle engines were closely approaching what we consider to be modern machines. Bikes like the Honda CBR 900RR Fireblade, Suzuki GSX R750, and Yamaha R1 were class-leading sport bikes. Sporting high-compression, high-revving engines, liquid cooling, and fuel injections, these motorcycles were able to rapidly eclipse what was previously considered to be a high-performance machine just 10 years prior. The Fireblade was able to make 154 horsepower and had an industry-leading power-to-weight ratio. Those are numbers that are still stout today. The Gixxer 750 was built to be lighter, faster, and stronger than Suzuki's previous sport bikes. It was so good that Suzuki would use it as a platform for the almighty GSX R1000. And the Yamaha R1, first released in 1998, would feature many examples of engine advancements that would help turn early superbike engines into the modern machines we know today. It had ram air intakes and electronically variable intake funnel lengths and a chip-controlled throttle. As motorcycle technologies become more advanced, manufacturers use onboard ECUs to control fueling and valve timing to allow the engine to make as much power as possible across the rev range. When the R1 was first released in 1998, it made just 150 horsepower. Then through 25 years of innovation and advancements, it's now able to produce 199 horsepower with a factory warranty. Today, as inline four-cylinder engines seem to be waning in popularity, V4 engines seems to reign supreme in the world of motorcycle racing and production sport bikes. The V4 engine has become popular in motorcycle racing due to several factors that make it well suited for high-performance applications. The V4 engine's compact layout allows for a shorter wheelbase and a more centralized mass, which can improve handling and agility. The V4 engine firing order can be tuned to provide broader power delivery compared to other engine configurations, which can be beneficial for traction and control, especially in challenging racing conditions. Ducati famously uses a V4 in their Panigale race bike, which in stock form is able to produce 210 horsepower and 91 foot-pounds of torque, but it's also found a home for it in other bikes in their lineup like the Street Fighter, Diavel, and Multistrada. The Panigale V4R, which Ducati uses in World Superbike, is capable of producing a whopping 240 horsepower with a factory warranty. Nowadays, the name of the game is much more about controlling power rather than making it. Ducati famously limits power in first through fourth gear for their V4R, and it's something they're doing in MotoGP as well. We've now got to the point where we can reliably make beyond 200 horsepower, and so now it's about giving that power to the rider in hand and making them go faster around the track. Or, even better, being able to control it going down the street and not eat themselves over a wet manhole. Motorcycle engines have come a long way. Of course, there have been gargantuan strides made in the last 120 years since motorcycles were first produced, but even in the last 2 decades, advancements in tech and engineering have made insanely powerful motorcycles the norm. That's not even mentioning what can be done with the motorcycle in the hands of a true expert tuner, but that's a topic for a whole other video. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys later. Fact: Neil Armstrong's hair was sold in 2004 for $3,000. I don't know why, but that's interesting. Goodbye. Sadly for you, this episode of Yami Noob is over, but there's a great way you can keep the conversation going with me is by becoming a member over on yaminoob.co. You'll join our Discord server. I'm on there literally every day. You can ask me questions, hang out with me. It's a great way to support the show. But if you just want to keep watching some amazing squid content, well, hit the link right over here and check out this next video. I promise you it's good.